So I want to just tell you a little bit about what's happened that has led to this moment when we're here for the second First Movers Summit. In 2006, an idea began to emerge at the Aspen Business and Society program. And the idea was this: we really began to wonder what would happen if we started to lift up stories of innovation in business, stories about exceptional businessmen and women who are creating new business practices, new products, new services, new business models that achieve great financial results for their companies, and also begin to solve some of the most challenging social and environmental problems we solve today. What would happen if we raised up those stories? What would we learn? Could we find lessons in these stories that we could use to help others work in these innovative and inspiring ways? We believed that we could. And it was about a year later when we began to imagine the First Movers Fellowship. And even another year beyond that, before we started the hunt for first movers. Now, about half of this room are First Mover Fellows, and half are others who are working in very similar space, but haven't been in the First Movers program. But I think we all know that finding people who are working this way in business is quite a challenge. It's not as if you have first mover or social entrepreneur on your business cards. So we started really looking deeply for people who were working in a way that looked across the horizon. People who wanted to work with deep purpose and also to put to work the great resources of the companies where they worked and the intent of their colleagues to solve some of the toughest problems that we face. So in 2009, we launched the First Movers Fellowship Program, and it's really designed for these innovators in business. And we hoped that by bringing them together, and we learn from them, they learn from each other and from us, that we could actually build a cohort of business people who would continue to work in ways that actually change the way business operates and even changes the terms of success for business. We are now working with our 5th class of fellows and in the process of selecting our 6th class. And I can tell you that it has been an incredibly rewarding experience to work with these individuals in business. And the best way, we think, to tell the First Mover Fellowship story is to let some of the first movers tell their stories. So what we're going to do tonight is to hear from 3 fellows. There are many more stories in this room, but we've chosen 3 fellows who represent very different worlds, fashion, food, and medicine, to share their stories and give you a sense of what this kind of innovation means in business today. And our format is that I'll introduce each of the fellows and they'll come up and tell their stories, and then they're going to come back on here on the stage and we'll have a collective conversation with them. So the first fellow I'd like to introduce is Paul Dillinger. Paul is head of global product innovation at Levi Strauss, and that means exactly what it says. He is responsible for Levi Strauss innovation efforts. He's been at Levi for 3 years, but in the design world for 16 more. He was with companies you'll all recognize: Calvin Klein, DKNY. He shares his expertise not only with his colleagues, but he teaches design at WashU, Washington University in St. Louis, and at RISD, Rhode Island School of Design. And because I think it's always interesting to get a sense of people's journeys, I'm just going to tell you what the academic path has been for the first movers you're going to hear tonight. Paul received his Bachelor of Fine Arts in Fashion Design from Washington University, and then was, get this, the first Fulbright Scholar in Fashion Design, and studied in Italy, and while there got his Master of Fine Arts from the Domus Academy. So Paul, welcome.
It's an enormously humbling privilege. I asked Garrett to make sure he got a picture of me with the blue Aspen banner behind me for my mom, who is hugely impressed by this journey, and she, like me, can't really account for it. But thank you for letting me come up here and share this story. It's a story that I hope is reflective of all of our experiences of challenge and struggle and reward in this journey. My motivation is really critical. As Nancy mentioned, I spent 16 years slogging it through in the fashion industry in New York, doing well and enjoying it. There had been a period when I was at one large fashion house as head of denim design, and moved to American Eagle for about 5 years, and then moved back to a different premium design house, competitive with the first. I've been working in the industry for a while, and I realized after 5 years I was cutting the same fabric into the same fits, using the same finishes, selling them to the same mean buyers at the large retailers for exactly the same price points with higher margin expectations. And when you look deeper into that, you realize that you have 5 years later returned to the same point to be making product more cheaply and at a lower wage. And that there was real gouging happening at the factory level, and there's only one place for that value to be extracted. And I became extremely disillusioned, and I am a creature of habit. I don't like change. I hate change, in fact. And I just couldn't do it anymore. And I came to this aha moment, this moment of change in my life, and I said, well, to hell with this. I'm going to go teach. If you're looking to escape the circle and a spiral bureaucracy of the fashion world and go for something less cumbersomely bureaucratic, it's not going to be found in academia necessarily. And worse yet was I had a tremendous pleasure of going back to my undergraduate alma mater to teach, and found that the class of the students that were of such extraordinary caliber, but were really professional grade getters at that point. And when you tried to explore motivation for why they were, in this case in the design field, that it really came from the Rachel Zoe Project or from Project Runway, and I shouldn't name names, but really the most shallow, valueless reasons to go into a profession were the principal motivators for these students. It was really about the champagne runway culture that was motivating them. And so when I would ask them about the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, one of the really pivotal moments in the American labor movement that happened at a women's or a shirt factory where so many immigrant laborers had died, and they knew nothing of it. So there had been a deficiency in the history education somewhere along the line, and I was in this position of trying to create to create an educational framework for social value within the context of fashion education. And so when I got the call from Levi, Strauss and Company, while I was teaching, they offered me this opportunity to continue to teach, which they supported and funded, but also to come and try to create change at Levi's. And that brings me to this opportunity in the First Movers program. The first step in this was really to identify the problems, and one of them is the race to the bottom that we all participate in, from the consumers through the manufacturers, the retailers certainly, and then also the outsourcing of waste and the outsourcing of guilt. When the clothes are just too old for you to wear, which means they're probably not that old and totally wearable, we donate them to someone else. We give ourselves moral permission to go shop, and that seemed to be a problem. And another problem seems to be that we spend all this energy making, and we know in the making there's polluting, and yet we still want ever lower prices, and that there is this aversion to true cost at the cash register. And so I wanted to think of a way of reimagining the full system. When we think about efforts to create sustainable apparel, we often hear about marketing strategies around organic cotton. never mind the potential that that organic cotton may have been picked by child or bonded labor. We talk about, process differences or energy savings or water savings. We hear a lot about single component calibration without regard for the fact that it's a massive system of components. And there was no real effort to collect all of the different areas of influence into one collective understanding and to try to create a design methodology that would tackle that. Now, one of the great humbling moments is whenever you try to tackle the full understanding of a system, you realize exactly how dumb you are. There's no way anyone could get the full thing, and I'll get into that a little later. But so my project for the Aspen First Movers Fellowship was to try to create this holistically sustainable design and development method that would be applied to a product category. And I was given permission by Levi's to actually put this into practice, with the premise that that product platform would then be the foundation on which we could consider a new hypothetical business model, one that didn't require things like comparable store sales increases or sort of inventory management mechanisms that dump a product in order to hit quarterly numbers. We could imagine a new system that was free of a lot of the worst practices that drive this race to the bottom. And then third, if I could design this design method and this business model in such a way that components could be extracted, joined, and taught into a cross-disciplinary educational framework, that we could try to affect a new class of contributors coming up in the system. And so that's what I did. And all along the way, learned exactly how much I don't know. But a lot of learnings emerged that I think are pretty important to share. And I'd like to share the learnings before I actually share the project with you. First of all, it became really apparent that really design makes the problem. Someone said to me, "You seem awfully confident as a designer that you'll be able to solve this problem." And I'm like, "Well, I'm not terribly confident I can solve it, but I'm absolutely certain that I caused it. Absolutely certain that this is mine. This is my mess to clean up." And there's another great feature of being a designer, other than just being allowed to make messes, in that much like the fool in King Lear, the only one who speaks truth to the old blind king, the designer can say pretty much anything. I have permission in the boardroom to make sort of heretical claims about the death of capitalism and to say, what about not selling so very many things? What about selling fewer things? What about asking people to trade things? And, just all the incendiary anti-capitalist rhetoric that a designer is at liberty to throw around, that any responsible business professional would be axed immediately if they would. And that can be me. And I try hard to cultivate the professional personality that's allowed to do that. And I think I've done well with that. No one takes me seriously. And the other thing is to realize that once confronted with the truth, that fundamentally you have to assume that everyone out there operates with goodwill. I once had a buyer from a very large retailer once say to me, "You don't understand, Paul, our consumer just doesn't care about sustainability." And that's a really funny answer to a question I can't even imagine. Because if the question was, how do you like your water? Clean? Do you like your clean air that you're breathing? Do you enjoy persistent formaldehyde in the liver of your child, off-gas from your pants? No, I don't think the answer is I don't like sustainability. I think the question was asked wrong. And if you start every conversation, every storytelling opportunity with things like, 25% of the pollution in the world coming from agriculture comes from a crop we don't eat. Why is that? Or, what year do you think it will be when the value of an acre yield of cotton from Pakistan will finally be worth less to Western consumption than that same acre yield of food will finally be worth to domestic consumption? Like, if you start asking questions like that and start exploring the topic, you win people over quickly, and that it becomes not just an idea of sustainability, but a moral imperative for sustainability. And the more people you can tell the story to, the more quickly you can create change and you can bring it along. And so the Aspen Institute First Movers Program and the emphasis on storytelling has been a really critical a feature to the success of this program. The other thing that I say was successful, I think we learned it on our very first day here over at the Koch building, when Brian graphed out on 2 axes, forming 4 quadrants, is your project aligned with your company's capabilities, and is it aligned with your company's values? I think I was the only one that enjoyed the way up there in the corner. This is totally within my company's capabilities and totally aligned with my company's values. So the idea of innovating downhill. It's just easier. to try not to swim upstream so much and to try to figure out the ways that you can get the company working for you. I enjoy this process that says every 6 months we need new inputs, and every 6 months we'll get new outputs. Why not make those inputs values guided? Why not say the inputs are just going to be us trying to do the right thing? And it puts a really different spin on the process. And it also, you're going to get product out at the end. And if you can make the product that comes out at the end, product that you're proud of, product that you can go to sleep at night having made, product that didn't pollute so very much, then you're going to be a happy person for it. So I think storytelling being the critical feature, I'm going to ask a friend of mine to come up here and I'm going to tell a couple stories about a couple pieces of clothes. What's more basic than a simple T-shirt and a pair of pants? To demonstrate a values-guided material, a values-guided design and development strategy. So it's just a pair of pants. So we have to ask ourselves, with what is it made, where is it made, how is it made, and how often will it be made? This pair of pants was made using 100%, let me describe a cotton scenario for you. One that's not organic necessarily, but is smart fertilization, smart pesticide deployment at the time of day using the right calibrated, decreased amount of water that's going to create as little runoff as possible at a field surrounded by box crops that catch all that effluence. This is the only cotton that we can say with certainty is certified not to have used any child or bonded labor. And you can't say that about a single other garment that any of y'all are wearing today, including the things I've got on. So there's something really important to be considered about the source of material. And what it took was Levi's combining forces with a lot of other companies, knowing that this type of statement is important and so far deep into the supply chain that no one feels that they have influence or visibility. But if enough like-minded companies come together in pre-competitive collaboration and say, let's form an alternative economy around values-guided cotton cultivation, that we have a chance to change some of the worst practices of the industry. Now, if you get all that together and make a 100% sort of values-guided cotton material here, and you use it in everything that you make, and you don't change it season after season, and you commit not only to the 60s 3-ply twill, but if you take that 60s yarn, which is a very fine yarn, and you apply it twice, you suddenly have a 60s 2-ply jersey. If you apply it once, a 60s single poplin. You've created a fully rationalized fiber strategy as well as a fabric strategy as well as a garment strategy that reduces waste. And waste being pollution, yes, but waste also being cost. If you then send it to the mill to be woven into this fabric, but you don't dye it at the mill, because once again, the mill's too deep into the supply chain for us to have real visibility or control. You say, hold off on the color, because I can't tell if you're polluting or not. Let me take this to the factory where I have total control over whether or not the pollution's happening. And I worked closely with that factory to come up with a type of dyeing method that uses no salt, therefore doesn't require the desalination process, and saves 60% of the energy in the dyeing processes, and also happens at cold water levels. So not only are we not heating up the water, we're allowed to use about 30% less dye, and the discharge is clean water that comes out into the environment at the same temperature that went in. So a lot of the metrics around water discharge are around the particulate in the water. Very few people are considering what the warm microclimates around factories are actually doing, and we can confirm a neutral microclimate around the factory because of water output here. And the factory's in Bangladesh. Now, at our last convening at Greenleaf is right when the Rana collapse was happening, and we had this opportunity to steer clear of Bangladesh. But this particular garment is made at a factory in Bangladesh, where Levi's and the factory have carved out a portion of the cost of goods that is going into a fund that's managed by an in-country NGO that's delivered surveys to the factories that have said, what do you need in terms of community development? Past fair labor in the factory, past the medical services access in the factory, what do you need outside the factory to make this a better community to work in? The vote surprised us. The vote was for access to and education around financial literacy services for women. You don't really think about what happens when they get paid in cash, do you? And who that cash goes to when that cash is being paid in a country with a challenging cultural context. And so for us to be able to give access to financial services for the very first time to interest and to protection for the money that's being earned is a great reward for me to be able to say, I as a designer have participated in this. Now the challenge is, this is happening at one of 5 pilot factories within approximately 600 factory vendor base in Levi Strauss. Now, I as a designer want to participate in the value being generated at those 5 factories, but what do I as a designer have to do in order to accommodate the capabilities of those factories so that work can be done in a place I know to be generating social value? And it takes social value and puts it as co-equal in the hierarchy against fashion and trend. And I personally, as a designer, would rather know that I'm delivering some sort of positive value to the community versus making sure I've got orange as the next black or whatever the scenario is for a given season. And then finally, the garment is designed to last. We're 3 seasons in and the garment style hasn't changed, the fit hasn't changed. The formulation that saves 60% of the energy and 30% of the water hasn't changed. The colors have changed a little, but most of the colors have remained the same. And we've created a merchandising scenario that supports sustained ownership, recognize that there's lasting value in quality product. And the only refinements we make are when we discover a deficiency in the construction, we make it better. And so the garment's been designed, there are loops on the interior that will allow you to hang it up so it can be hung to dry. And if you do that, it's going to last you quite a bit longer than the average garment on the market today. Now, the T-shirt is my favorite because, again, we discussed the material strategy. It's made with a cold water pigment dye. And this was done at a factory that collects all the rainwater from the roofs of the factory to use in the garment dyeing process. And then what little heat is used in the process is generated from solar power. Traditionally, a T-shirt has a pocket on it, and the pocket's there just so it doesn't look like the T-shirt that's in your underwear drawer. The pockets are useless. Nobody puts anything in those pockets. It creates 2 substantive points of weaknesses right where the corners where that pocket is adhered. And so if you must have differentiation, because you must, well, there's your pocket. It's printed on. And most importantly, if anyone's ever tried to hang a wet T-shirt, if I'm putting in a label that says, I need you to wash this on cold and not dry it, if anyone's ever tried to hang that wet T-shirt, we know it drips out and you get those little points on those Romulan points on your shoulder. And so all it took was to simply take on the shoulder here, the 2 pieces overlapping at cross grain when wet, create a point of real strength where there was a point of weakness, allowing you to take this garment and hang it up and not put it in a dryer, substantively increasing the useful life of that garment and allowing you to keep it longer and save a lot of energy across the life of the garment. Because we know about 50% of the energy and more than 60% of the water used over the life cycle of garments is consumed after the garment's been purchased, and we have very little influence over that. But the best we can do is design to hopefully help people care for the garments longer and get greater value. And so thank you, Garrett, for modeling with us. With that, what I'll do is I'll show you a little snippet of the full collection. You can get a sense of how our marketing team has taken on the challenge of complexity. I think we're missing volume. Okay.
And collaboration. Yeah. Designers thinking about sustainability, because here, sustainability is everything.
One of the most important fundamental features of sustainability is durability, lasting value.
It's behind every choice, every step of the process. Every cut, every stitch, every single seam. The capacity to endure, that is the definition of sustainability. And this is Dockers WELLTHREAD. Clothes designed to last. This is not fashion for fashion's sake. This is fashion for everyone's sake. This is intention worn proudly. This is choosing the highest quality fabric.
Really beautifully, densely packed 60s 3-ply, the best twill we can work with.
This is a more sustainable cotton, farmed with less chemicals, dyed and finished responsibly. This is using less energy. This is reinforcing parts of the clothing that wear harder than others. This is telling the truth and creating a truth we're proud to tell. This is long-term thought behind every design decision. This is hanging to dry. This is using less water. This is nothing done without a reason. Design based in function, not fashion. This is a new way of making, a movement. And these are our 4 pillars, a true north for everything we do.
It's our job to deliver valuable product. It's our job to deliver product that they're going to care about. It's also our job to make sure that we do it in a way that is restorative to the environment and positive for the people who make the product.
This is Dockers WELLTHREAD. Welcome to the new beginning. It started with an idea.
Paul, thank you. That was terrific. Now I'd like to introduce you to Diana Simmons. Diana is Director of New Product Commercialization at a very different company, but a company that you all will know, Clif Bar. In fact, many of you may have Clif Bars in your bags as we speak. So Clif Bar, as you know, is a leading maker of nutritious and organic foods and drinks. And Diana has been a part of this company and its growth for a decade. Joined in 2004. Clif Bar has a commitment to 5 bottom lines, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that from Diana: sustaining our business, our brands, our people, our community, and the planet. And Diana brings to the company not only a deep understanding of that sustainability commitment, but also real expertise in brand management. And Diana's, she did some consulting in the sustainability space before she joined Clif Bar. And just on my theme of where do people come from academically, I think it's interesting to note that Diana's bachelor's degree was in human biology, with a focus on environmental policy, and she has an MBA from Stanford. So Diana, we're eager to hear your story.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Aspen, for having me here. I'm excited to share my story. I don't have props like Garrett's, but I do feed people, so feel free to eat. I've discovered that if I have nothing good to say, at least you've eaten something that's tasty, I hope. So I want to start by talking a little bit about a professor way back in college who gave me job search advice. He said, do not take a job unless it scares the crap out of you. His words actually weren't that polite. But he said that because if something doesn't scare you, it's actually not a good opportunity. And I've carried that with me. And I think it really applies to change in business. There's actually another way that I think about it, and it's through a joke, and I tell jokes badly, so I will paraphrase this one a little bit. There are 2 boys, and they're twins, 6-year-old boys. One's a pessimist, and one's an optimist. The dad wants to kind of get at how they think and what's going on in their head, and so he fills the pessimist's room with toys, and he fills the optimist's room with horse manure. Sends them off to play. Checks in on them later, figure out what they're doing. The little boy, the pessimist, is sitting in this room full of toys, and he is crying. Dad, there are all these toys. My friends are going to be jealous. The instructions are hard to read. There are too many of them. The batteries are going to die, and the toys are just going to break eventually. This is just awful. The dad, oh, okay, so I'm going to go check on the optimist. Goes into the other kid's room, mind you, a room full of manure. As a parent, I don't want to think about really how you would do that, but for the sake of the joke, the little boy is on top of this pile of manure, and he is digging, and he is ecstatic. Dad, this is great. With all this manure, there must be a pony in here somewhere. So why do I tell you all this? What's my point? It's not that I'm good at telling jokes. It's because I think the mess and the chaos and the complexity and the negative forces that a lot of us face in business are actually the potential energy for creating positive social change. It's what the Aspen First Movers program is all about. And what we need to do as leaders is harness those negative forces, often the chaos, the complexity, the messiness, and leverage it to create social change. We need to transform it. So I've learned a few things about how to do this in my experiences, and that's what I want to share. So I'll start with an example about something you're eating right there. Clif Bar made a commitment in 2012 to source sustainably certified cocoa in its food. Now, we use organic ingredients as much as possible. Over 75% of the ingredients that we buy in all our products are organic. But we wanted to figure out how to go beyond organic. As a participant in the global food system, we felt like it was really important to think not just about the environment, but about economic and social standards as well. So we found a partner, Rainforest Alliance, and Rainforest Alliance has really strict standards, really stringent requirements that support farmers and their communities. Also, healthy farming practices and the environment. And they could help us figure out how to do this with our food. So here I was, trying to figure out how to make 100% of the cocoa in our Clif Bar products sustainably certified. This is not a new product that I'm launching. My team launches a lot of new products, so we get to start from scratch. And I wasn't a social entrepreneur trying to figure out how to do this from the beginning. I was trying to change our 22-year-old flagship brand within a company, albeit much smaller than those many of you work for, of 350 people. So there were existing relationships, existing processes, existing suppliers of all these ingredients. Already this was getting complicated and overwhelming and feeling chaotic. So how was I going to go forward? Well, first I had to get at the big mess. Let's figure out what was there. We had 12 ingredients in our bars that were cocoa-containing ingredients. Those ingredients, we had to figure out how to source sustainably, so we had to change our recipes. We had to figure out how to make a certified traceable chain of custody for all of those ingredients, from the crop to the final bar. Okay, could do that. And now there are the packaging changes. The packaging. 13 flavors of Clif Bars in the US contain cocoa, 7 more for Canada, 3 more for other export countries, and 3 mini-sized bars. So there's 26 packages right there that we were going to have to change. Those 26 packages go into 52 different boxes at all our different retailers. 78 different packages had to change at each of 2 different bakeries. So that's a fractal. It made my head hurt. And we'd made a public commitment to do this in 9 months. Plus, we had real people behind all of this stuff that had to happen. The cross-functional teams that I work with that support our products include food supply, ingredient and packaging procurement, our food safety group, finance, brand, creative, the R&D team, of course, and my team, which does the commercialization of all the products. 1/3 of our company touches our products when we're launching or changing something. And those real people are in a company that has a values-based mission. I'm really lucky to be there. So these people are also passionate people. And I'll talk a little bit more about the challenges that can come when working with passionate people. So how did this all feel? It was completely overwhelming. I was scared, paralyzed, fill in the blank with the word. But I had to keep going. So what did I do? Decided I had to ask dumb questions. Here's the secret that I've learned is that great leaders ask dumb questions, because dumb questions aren't actually dumb. They're just questions that you don't know the answer to. And I think that by asking those dumb questions, I was able to get at opportunities and interesting ideas and ways of creatively solving problems that I might not have had I not asked the dumb question in the first place. Paul actually alluded to this a little bit. He asked lots of questions that he didn't know answers to. And you can do that because you're a designer. I'm supposed to know the answers, but I asked dumb questions anyway. So by doing that, I exploded the details, and I found even more complexity. So of the 12 ingredients, we had 7 suppliers of our existing cocoa ingredients. Half of them didn't use Rainforest Alliance certification, didn't know what it was, weren't aware of the standards. Turns out we had to also match the flavor of the chocolate that we were going to switch. If anybody has tried different chocolates from different countries, chocolates taste different. So this was no small task. We were going to have to test all the recipes. We also were sourcing a non-trivial amount of chocolate. I needed to make sure we had 1.5 million pounds of chocolate a year. to put into our bars. And that packaging I talked about, we had existing inventory of every single type of packaging. So we were going to have to figure out how to exactly match in a complex forecasting scenario the old packaging finishing completely and the new packaging beginning. So there was the potential that a decision that was good for the planet, good for people, good for communities, could actually create huge amounts of waste. And that was a huge challenge to have to take on. So this complexity and this mess was definitely there. Where did I start after that? I was in the mess. I was digging through the manure. You know, all of us learn as good leaders and good project managers, you articulate the goal. Well, in this case, that was an easy one. I'm really fortunate to be in a place that made the commitment to use the sustainably certified cocoa. So our goal was get 100% certified sustainable cocoa into new packaging in 9 months and make the products taste just the same. Okay, that was an easy goal to state, but it was still going to be hard to get there. So with my team, we then take on a practice called building a trail map. And something that we all learn when you're kind of taking on a project and making a plan is that you have to articulate the milestones and the steps and the activities. And the trail maps that we create at Clif Bar are actually different from that. We try to articulate the topography of the challenge. That means putting down all of the unanswered questions, the obstacles, the potential roadblocks, in addition to the assumptions upon which your plan is based. And then you can craft the trail through that topography to get to your summit. So what that allows me to do with my teams is then, when we face challenge, not if, because there will be changes, there will be challenges we didn't anticipate, we can go back to the trail map and look at that topography and say, okay, do we need to take another route to the summit? And if we do so, what risks are we taking on? What potential challenges are we going to face by going that other route? We can see those risks and those trade-offs and have those frank discussions in a way that allows us to make educated decisions. One example in doing this is that we found out the cocoa butter that came from our Rainforest Alliance certified source melted at a lower temperature than the other cocoa butter we were using. We already had the packaging in production. We were ready to go. Do we stop? Do we take the risk? Do we figure out if we can find another ingredient supplier? Well, we pulled out our trail map and we looked at all the reasons why we could delay the launch, figure out how to make changes to the packaging if we had to find another source. But at the end of the day, that map let us look at those trade-offs and make an educated decision and take a risk. It all worked out. But regardless, we were able to look at those trade-offs clearly in a transparent way and bring that to the leadership team to be able to make the decisions. So I've dug through all the complexity and the mess. We've put out our plan. But I mentioned obstacles, and we still faced obstacles along the way. And there's this story that I think about when I think about obstacles and constraints. And I mean, even those words are negative. When I was learning to mountain bike, and I'm a bad mountain biker, I was obsessed with all the rocks and the stumps and the tree branches. I don't know if anybody mountain bikes here, but you go down these skinny little trails and there's a rock, don't run over the rock, don't run over the rock. And I run over the rock and I bail. And I was given some advice. Don't look at the rock, look at the space in between the rocks, find the line. Many people skied already, right? That's what you're supposed to do. You see the obstacles in order to define them and find the space in between. But I wasn't thinking about that. I was just obsessing about the rocks. And I found that when I face challenges in these projects, we can use the constraints and use the obstacles, define them in order to then see the opportunity. And it's turning that negative energy and some of that negative complexity into some positive change. One of the examples we faced is that half of our cocoa suppliers, I mentioned, had never heard of Rainforest Alliance and weren't taking part in their standards. But half did. And so we focused on figuring out what the half that did was doing in order to overcome some of the challenges. How did they make it work, even if they were small producers? How did they achieve those standards? It took a lot of patience and a lot of persistence, but we were actually able to bring all the suppliers with us on our journey. We didn't have to go find new suppliers. So we were able to make this change and do it with our existing supplier base and actually grow the impact that we were able to have by bringing them on that journey towards sustainably certified ingredients. So some of these things are things that you might learn in business school, but there's the really, really difficult factor in making change happen that I've discovered, and that's the human factor. I mentioned passionate people. Passionate people bring their passions. They're fueled by them. That's why I go to work every day. I get fired up and excited to work because I'm working in alignment with my values, and I love that. But passionate people also bring their emotions, their stress, and their tensions, more so than in some other business environments where you might not have that come to the table. And I've learned it's important to recognize that. I'll be honest, Clif Bar is only 350 people, so a change like adding the Rainforest Alliance certification created incremental work. Everybody had full plates already, and we were asking them to do more. I met with real resistance, people who did not want to take this on. I had a team member come in once and say, there is no way we can do this. I can't do this, this, or this, and we've got this problem, and this problem. We can't make the deadline. Well, that person could have been just a crappy manager of their time, or they could have been faced with a ton of really critical, high-priority projects. But I paused because I've learned that you have to validate how they feel, because in a way it doesn't matter in the moment, the cause. What they're feeling is the obstacle, and it's important to recognize that. I mean, validating people is something we do in other parts of our lives, I think, way more naturally. With our kids, our partners, right? You validate their emotions, you value what they're feeling. And it's something I've learned now to do with my teams. It's more than listening, and it's more than just empathy. Connecting with people and letting them know that you understand the challenges that they're facing. I'm with you. I get it. I know we've got all this stuff going on. All right, so how can we work together to get through it? Was a way to overcome those obstacles. Another tool I've found to work through some of these issues where we may, be dealing with people who are overworked, stressed, and or concerned about a project is to create neutral ground, create a safe space. And sometimes, though it sounds trite to say, I put myself in their shoes, I've taken the perspective of a function that maybe is having trouble articulating in a team meeting why they think something is challenging and may not work, and I bring the issue up. By doing so, I can do it in a neutral way and set up an objective discussion about how to problem solve, rather than that person maybe feeling like it was too tough or might be volatile if they bring up that issue. One of the other tactics I've used is making sure that teams feel invested in the goal and connected to the goal. Setting up this big goal is one thing, that we want to have Rainforest Alliance certified cocoa in our products. But come on, we were putting 78 little frogs on packages. Our creative team was overwhelmed. They had to create 78 new art files for all of our packages. And by the way, 6 months later, we had planned changes for our packaging, so they were going to have to touch all the packaging files again. So I heard them. They were overwhelmed. And I could tell that they didn't feel connected to this goal. They felt like it was just extra work. So I figured out with my team how to expedite other changes that were going to happen 6 months later and incorporate those into this project so that the creative team could actually only do this once. And it was a lot more work to pull in all the other pieces, but by doing so, we were able to create a goal that was shared by that team as well, because they felt like they'd been heard, and they felt like they could now relate to the challenge and get it done and be on board. I'm convinced that valuing people can create inspired teams. Why do all of these leadership skills matter? Why am I telling all these stories? It's because existing products and existing organizations need to find ways to create change. That's what Aspen is all about. They need leaders who can transform complexity and chaos into momentum, who can ask dumb questions and put order to that, who can create trail maps that let them see the whole topography and maybe take a different route or regroup at base camp sometimes. They need people who can see obstacles as opportunities and who can value people to create inspired teams. And all of this is because I think that that negative energy, that complexity, and that chaos really is the potential energy for creating positive social change. So thank you for your time and your attention.
Diana, thank you so much. Both you and Paul remind us that a commitment to a goal is the first step, and the complexity of getting there and all of the challenges that that presents sometimes makes the goal feel perhaps further away. But thank you for that story. And now I'd like to introduce Adrian Thomas. I'm going to start with his academic background. Adrian is trained as a physician. He got his training at the University of Melbourne. And I think Adrian may have one of the longest titles I've ever seen, but I think it gives you a sense of the path that Adrian has taken since his medical training. So he has responsibility at a company called Janssen, a name you may not know, but Janssen is actually the pharmaceutical business of Johnson & Johnson. And his responsibilities cover access to global markets, global commercial strategy operations, and global public health. Well, that sounds like a fairly large challenge. And he's going to tell you about the ways he sees that challenge currently and how he's helping Janssen bring together all of its capabilities to meet some of our pressing unmet health needs in markets around the world. Adrian?
I'm going to start with the video clip, which many of you may have seen, but I saw recently, and I was stunned by it, because for me it actually summarized the Aspen experience for me, and I wanted to share it because it really is probably the underlying theme to my story.
Do to my sign?
I wrote the same, but in different words.
Thanks, love.
Can I start with, who has he seen that before? Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? And for me, I'm not going to talk so much about the terrible diseases that exist everywhere in the world, because that could be a little bit depressing. But for me, it's really about the Aspen experience. I want to talk about storytelling and reframing the story in a way that people can understand. And it's particularly important when you think about the role of, what I only heard of recently, but I love, the social entrepreneur, which is when you're in large corporations, you know, like Johnson & Johnson's been around for 128 years, has 130,000 employees. The farm business has 40,000 employees and is a little bit more than a third of the turnover, so pushing $72 billion. It's a big company that has its eye on growth. And so when you want to start talking about social change and really changing maybe the fabric of the way we think about our business, then you're going to have to frame it in a different way. And I didn't really appreciate that until I sat down in Aspen, actually, almost a year ago, and listened both to my classmates, but also to the facilitators, the design team. So as I think about my story, which is around how do you improve access to medicines, and I'm a physician, a cardiologist, I've worked in a variety of different jobs, but Johnson & Johnson or Janssen asked me 5 years ago, they said, will you come and think about how to improve overall access to our medicines, and not from a financial perspective, but how do we reach more people? And they took a big risk because I knew nothing about the responsibility I was given at the time, which was health economics and pricing, pharmaceutical pricing. It's a very sensitive topic. I was the head of drug safety, and they wanted to take a very different view, which showed that at heart the corporation recognized that this was going to take something different, and it was going to take probably people who you wouldn't normally put a risk on in that space. And 5 years ago, we started a strategy, and I sort of think many of us think of the glamorous first mover as some sort of Sisyphus pushing this enormous rock up the hill. That's what it was like. But it wasn't glamorous, like pushing a rock up a hill. It was more like this, which was the business planning process, where you go through stages, and any thoughts? Too busy. Last chance to weigh in? Sorry, too busy. Can I get your buy-in? Sorry, too busy. And then I'm free now. Okay, and the rock rolls back down. And so talking about transformational change, talking about how to not just address the issues with existing markets, which have massive issues with healthcare cost, the aging demographics, chronic diseases, affordability, but also middle income and self-pay markets where people are making choices. Branded generics, innovative products, childcare, school, car, water, housing. There's no government or insurance agency like we have in the US. Or even worse, the third group, which is the poorest of the poor, the people that we all pay for because they can't pay for themselves, who suffer devastating illnesses on a daily basis, and where life expectancy is in the 40s compared to, say, 86 in the Nordic region or 70s in the US. So you're talking about improving overall medicine in very different environments, and you can't do that by trying to frame the business opportunity or break it down in a granular way and try and explain to people on a P&L basis how over a 12 or 24-month period you're going to change the world. So what I learned is really you have to totally change the story. It's about healthcare. And when I started the project, I was thinking about tuberculosis because we were about to launch the first new product that had been developed for drug-resistant tuberculosis in over 40 years. In fact, the only one specifically developed for that in over 40 years. And I went on a bit of a fact-finding tour. In fact, I have a great team, by the way, a fantastic team and a really supportive management. So we all went on a fact-finding tour. And team members went to Haiti, we went to the Eastern Europe, we went to Latin America, many parts in Africa. And it was a little bit depressing because what we realized is if we just think about multi-drug resistant TB, and this lady has multi-drug resistant TB, you know, of the 500,000 people who develop it every year, which has around about a 50% mortality rate, here's the depressing part, less than 15% get the medicines that exist today, let alone we're bringing out a new product. So it's not really about the products as much. I mean, innovation's important, but it's really about how do you improve access, how do you get things to people and make a difference. And so when you think about something as important as that, as impossible as that, then you really need to think about a different way of communicating it. And that's what I learned. And I think we've been successful. I want to tell you a little bit about it. This is it. This is the detailed business plan for how we're going to improve healthcare in all the regions in the world and how we're going to change the future and drive access and all the rest of it. And it's incredibly simple. It's a cartoon. And what I decided was, if you want to talk really big topics, you can't get bogged down in details. You have to talk about what the opportunity is and make it tangible. I'm not going to describe this all to you, but basically we broke the world up into 3 worlds. Left-hand side, institutional and government markets, insurance companies. You recognize all of the famous buildings which immediately align senior management who lives in these countries to what you're talking about. The second being the dual highway of self-pay and emerging markets. There are plenty of people there who, like on the right-hand side, by the way, that's inspired by the Pennsylvania Turnpike. The right-hand side in the flashy sports car, this is the sort of person who can afford healthcare anywhere. They make more money than people do in the US and in Europe, and they travel to get the best healthcare. And if you look at the top 5 emerging markets, which is 3 billion people in the top 5 emerging markets, there's 275 million people who have more net worth than people in the US and in Europe. So those are people who really should be paying for the healthcare. On the other hand, you have the person on the left-hand side who has poor credit and can't get an easy pass, right? And these people are making choices about schooling, education, food, and they're leaving the issue of relative affordability. And on the right-hand side is the Great Grand Canyon of global public health. This is the countries where there's no infrastructure, there's no access to physicians or nurses, there's poor access to diagnostics. You still have incredible burdens of diseases. Yes, you have things like cancer and diabetes, but to be honest, those are diseases of the elderly. You still have infant mortality rates that are terrible, childhood and maternal mortality rates at childbirth are unacceptable. You have the burden of tuberculosis, of HIV, and that was a learning for me, you know, by getting to the detail and doing this fact-finding tour and trying to understand what the problem really looked like. I'm a physician, and I've actually worked in an infectious diseases hospital in Australia a long time ago, and I would have thought that I knew something about, you know, burden of disease and infectious diseases. I never realized that tuberculosis disproportionately affects women and children. It's a disease of poverty, and in these markets, that's who gets impacted. HIV disproportionately affects women and children. So as you think about worms, women and children, filariasis, which is elephantiasis and other terrible sorts of systemic parasites, again, women and children. So as you think about those challenges, you know, they're so enormous, but you need to have a focused and targeted approach. But it's a wasteland because, frankly, after 10 to 15 years of experience with HIV, we still only have 1/3 of the world's population who need treatment being treated. And of those who are failing treatment, we don't have a plan to how to give them second-line treatment. That's important for us because actually my company Janssen is the world's dominant player in second and third-line HIV products. But a test to diagnose that you need to move from one treatment to the other, that we would get here in the US without any question, costs more. That test costs more than a full year of treatment itself. So it's not a priority in these markets. So if we're going to solve all these problems, again, the question is not, are they important? Are they serious? Is the burden of healthcare that great? The real question is, what can a corporation, like the one I work for, do that's different and unique in this space and that really adds value? And this is where I think, again, the storytelling came out, because as I met with non-governmental organizations, as I met with people that ran orphanages in Tanzania and Uganda, as I met with patients who were orphans suffering from HIV/AIDS, you know, they did not want to hear the pharmaceutical industry or corporate America talking about the patient as such. What they wanted to hear about, and it was a real aha for me, was how can you bring your corporate business acumen to this problem? Because that's what we value. You know, we have physicians somewhere, we have nurses somewhere, we have NGOs delivering care. There are aid agencies and donor bodies like the Gates Foundation and so on, and the Global Fund who deal with financing. What's missing in this is the contribution of the business acumen that actually the healthcare industry can offer to this space. And so another very, very simple cartoon that I used for our management was to say, look, the company's brought the first new TB drug to the market in 40 years. We're specialists in resistant bugs for HIV. And we have a Children Without Worms program that's treated 100 million children to date. And we're bringing out new formulations that are water-sparing and child-friendly. it's our obligation to think more broadly than we supply products and throw them over the wall and that's the problem solved. We have to think about how do we convene a broader conversation about what's the role of the industry in bringing together the pieces that are missing to make this work. Now, there are plenty of other people doing this, so I don't want to give the impression that the public health infrastructure is missing or whatever else. It's lacking, it's still growing, but what's missing is the role of the business world in helping bringing alignment of incentives and bringing a business plan to this. And so if the issue in drug-resistant TB, drug-resistant HIV and parasites is actually diagnosing them, where are the diagnostics and how do we bring them together, for example? So we painted out this new world, this new ecosystem, which we're calling a biome, and saying our role in this is really, as the manufacturer of these products, as the innovator, to make sure that we actually drive human outcomes and not just deliver products at a low price, although that's obviously important. That's where it started, and honestly, when I showed this cartoon to people in our senior management, within a 5-minute conversation, they were on board, not a question. Because it wasn't about, I'm giving you my verdict of, is this business plan viable, is this number correct, is it really 15 people or 30 people that you need? The question was, would we stand up as a leading healthcare corporation and place a stake in the sand that this needs to be different in the future? And so about 3 months ago, we announced the formation of Janssen Global Public Health, a dedicated unit that works for novel collaborations in both the R&D side, but also on the access side, the commercial diagnostic and infrastructure side, which was pretty amazing. What was even more amazing is that the next day, and talking about synchronicity, I mean, it's been like a 8 to 9 month journey where people have just fallen over themselves to get involved in this. Crowdfunding came up. So as we were thinking about it, I spoke to probably, I think last time I mentioned it was about 1,000 people in the company about what we're planning on doing. I plan to speak to all 130,000 employees about this in somehow, some format, some way. Because what was amazing is our pharmaceutical business was founded by a guy called Dr. Paul Janssen in the 1950s. He was the most prolific discoverer of pharmaceuticals in history, of 80 compounds, 4 on the WHO essential medicines list. It was a legend. And we've been a player in infectious diseases for over 50 years. And when I tell the story about the pipeline that we have and the products and what we're doing in these markets and what we're investing in, staff knew nothing about it. And when they found out about it, they wanted to get involved. So a couple of staff members made an appointment with me and said, Adrian, we should think about crowdfunding. We should think about offering every single employee, and the center of these crowds are the employees, so there's, at least right now, there's sort of like 6 of them, and their social networks to get engaged in the projects that you're trying to do. And so, for example, we're starting a pediatric donation program for second-line HIV, and we can't give the products away because patients can't get diagnosed. But can our staff say, you know what, I'll pay for that viral load test? If you have 130,000 staff and all of their social networks doing this, can you imagine the impact to millions of people around the world? So this has been one of the most viral things that's happening right now, and it's not just inside the company, it's outside the company, and right now we're evaluating 6 new projects in TB, down the bottom in sleeping sickness, the Hajj. We've had a request for funding for us to be able to look at the Hajj, which is the largest single collection of people in the Muslim pilgrimage and has huge healthcare issues associated with it. TB, chronic diseases, infections, and we have a project going in that area, as well as we're looking at up the top right, financing new condos for patients recovering from infectious diseases in partnership. Incredible journey. At the end of it, though, the motivating factor has been this person, and this person isn't sick, and they shouldn't be sick. This person, wherever they live anywhere in the world, should have the same right to the same life expectancy and access to care as any other person in any other part of the world. But the ambition to get there has been what's driven the conversation and is what's changed the dynamic. Now, I started my job 5 years ago, and now I can see this being like a 15, 20-year horizon. But what's amazing is over a 1-year period, I've seen the attitudes of leadership change dramatically, and I consider myself one of leadership, to being, this is not unsolvable, and therefore we'll do what's responsible, we'll do philanthropy. But this is potentially solvable. This is potentially a way of creating a new business model and a new relationship for our industry with our customers, and therefore we have to do this, because if we don't do this, who else will? So with that, I want to just say thank you. A big thank you to the Aspen Institute, because no question that it changed the way I was thinking about my project. In fact, it changed it from being a TB project to a public health project and a business model project, which was fantastic, so thank you.
Those are just fabulous stories, aren't they? So we're going to ask Paul and Diana and Adrian to come back up, and let's try to have a collective conversation. Moderating that conversation for us is going to be David Langstaff. David is the chair of our advisory board at the Business and Society program, but David is a senior executive, has been CEO of a couple of companies, and has also served as moderator for the Aspen seminars for almost 20 years. So he's a good friend of ours and a friend of the Institute, and we welcome all four of you to come back up here, and let's all have a conversation about these amazing stories and your own.
Get seated.
Yeah. All the lights went down. Okay, we have about just over. So, do I need to turn it on or no button to push? Leave to you. We have just over 20 minutes. I thought this isn't so much a moderated discussion as it's going to be your questions, and I'll start with a question just to get us going. But then, do we have other microphones in the room? Okay, Garrett does. So raise your hand and let's. And my only request is make the question short so we can really hear what people have to say, and also be clear who you're directing your question to. So the question to Paul, just to start, is this one about how necessary was it to be doing what you're doing in a private company rather than a public company? Would that have made a difference?
I really think it does make a difference. The drive to the bottom, the retrained consumer that expects to pay nothing or very little for clothes, it's because the cadence of sale product is driven by the quarterly reporting structures that compel companies to dump their inventory, to clear out their stock, to get as lean as possible right around the time they have to report. In retail, especially, one of the biggest metrics of a healthy company is the comp store sales increase. Did you sell as many garments this year as last year? Plus one making you healthy suddenly. Profitability notwithstanding, it's about the comps and it's about the inventory. And as a private company, we have the privilege of not having to report out to the same degree of detail and not having to be as explicitly mindful. We don't have to play the game. And so when we look at great institutions like Wharton at the Baker Center for Retail Economics, where they're looking at a new Baker Index that may look at a different way of valuing companies, we're going to get an idea about is there a new understanding of health, and is it a long-term understanding? Is the healthy company someone that doesn't have to go around playing those sorts of financial games, trying to curry favor with the street 4 times a year? Because I would see it play out in really damaging ways at the companies I worked for in the past. And I think the freedom to operate with a little longer term view is one of the reasons that I operate with the kind of I'm allowed to imagine the way I am and dream the way I am.
And Adrian, but you're part of a public company. Did you have the tension in doing what you're doing and trying to bring the change about? Did you have to deal with the reality of the sort of the quarterly metrics and such?
It's kind of a mixed story because one of the toughest jobs that I have is explaining to our investors, why in the US drugs are so expensive, and what are we doing to actually address affordability everywhere. So we have a lot of institutional investors now who really want to understand what is our perspective on affordability and sustainability of access to medicines. And so one of the things that I think we're able to do is we're able to tell the story not as a philanthropy story, but it's a spectrum of the way that we do our business. And so, you know, we innovate, and there's a cost with that, and we can argue about what that cost should be, but we expect that people will pay the value where they can, and where they can't, we'll put in place mechanisms to address affordability, and where there's no affordability, then we have to partner with other people to make it happen in a sustainable way. So in some ways it's becoming, I think, increasingly important that public corporations have a view around what they're doing for the sustainability of their customer base and the system.
And Diane, and then we'll open it up for everyone. You told the story of needing to sort of validate the stresses and emotions of individuals who felt overwhelmed by things. But when you scale that, you're dealing with cultural resistance and institutional resistance sometimes. How did you deal with those elements that went beyond just single individuals?
I think the same principles apply. What are the sources of resistance? And whatever organization or institution is bringing that to the table, well, they're doing it for a reason, and it's important to understand what that reason is and validate it. It may be something you can then overcome or figure out how to work together to get through, but it's that human piece. I mean, organizations and institutions are made up of people, and we all want to feel like we're valued. And if you look at it that way, it kind of gets simple. And then as a team, you can work together through a challenge. It doesn't mean when I hear someone say, you know, we can't get this done, I'm sorry, our farm can't meet these standards, that we're gonna say, okay, well, you don't have to meet them, that's all right. We're not gonna necessarily change our goal, but if we understand why they're facing the challenges, then we can figure out how together to move forward. And so I think individuals or institutions, it's the same thing. You figure out how to work together and how to share that goal, and maybe it means taking on some other challenges that were theirs originally in order to move in that direction together.
So your questions. Yeah. Buzz.
Sure. Hi. I read somewhere that when a company grows to address the mass market, the definition of organic or sustainability changes. Have you found that to be the case?
Who are you addressing the question to?
Diane, I'm sorry.
The organic standards are set by the USDA, and so it doesn't matter if we're selling one bar to a natural food store or hundreds of thousands or millions of bars to Target or Walmart, we are going to follow the same standards. And so that doesn't change. The thing that's interesting is when you're looking at sourcing organic ingredients, you go from a world of perhaps a commodity oat to a much smaller world of the available organic oat. And then if we're looking at other factors around our quality or labor standards, it gets even smaller. So we have challenges within our supply chain and our sourcing that we face when we grow, because now all of a sudden we've got when we launch a new product and we want to use this really unique, wild-crafted ingredient that's organic, well, if I can't find 1 million pounds of that ingredient, we can't do that. We can't make that launch. So there are challenges that you face when you're trying to bring something to market if you are looking at scale, but it doesn't change the standards that we have to meet.
Yeah. In back.
So one of the common themes across all three of your presentations was this idea that there were a lot of questions that you had that you didn't necessarily know the answers to. And you guys talked about, asking stupid questions and asking lots of questions. I'm curious what that taught you. We can assume that you guys, as some of the smartest people in the room, if you've got stupid questions and don't know the answers, that the people who work underneath us or who are on our teams will also have questions, but they might not necessarily feel as empowered being out of a leadership position to ask those types of questions. So my question is, what types of management things did you learn about yourself that now allows you to help those who are coming up or who may be earlier in their careers to feel confident making mistakes and asking stupid questions?
It's a great question. We should hear from each of you on this.
Wow. So I was sharing today, actually, that one of my biggest challenges is not my project anymore. It's how can you be there enough for your people to actually support them through what they have to get done for the project to be successful? How do you get to that next level of layers? Which is why I think it's so important that you give people space to make mistakes. I mean, you said it, we don't have the answers. What I think we have in my project is we have directionality of where we need to be heading, and I'm sure it's going to be like wildly different than where I probably think it is today, 5 years from now. But we have to be able to accept that. And I think it's hard in a competitive corporate culture to really give people space from it. From my end, what I've done is I've actually engaged my HR organisation as being key thought partners. And so they're seeing the highest potential talent in the organisation is needing to come through this new group to try and learn some different business skills. And they're bringing people who automatically are kind of, I guess, more self-assured and dominant in terms of their performance in the company means that you bring people who are willing to ask questions. But it's a huge challenge. I don't know how. I don't really have a great plan around that, to be honest.
It's an interesting question, and I hope that no one who's been managed by me would ever listen to the answer, because they'll realize they've been played. To stop learning anything, I mean, there's tons that I don't know, and I've decided to stop learning anything on my own, and assign the research to the people that were working for me. So if I need to know about availability of recycled cotton buttons, rather than finding it out and learning and finding out what temperature they need to be garment dyed at and what the constraints around tear and tensile strength would be in their application, and to assign that research project to someone else so that they become the expert on it. And to coincide with that activity is to assign to them extremely smart interns that they're responsible for managing. And I think that the managing of smart people will keep you on your toes. And so to even the most junior assistant designer, to make sure she had just the whip smartest student from RISD as her intern, really upped her game. It forced her to rise to a position where along with all the research she was being assigned, that she really became a smarter, sharper, more confident person as a result of it. And it got me out of doing a lot of research on my own. And I became more... I'm not lazy per se, but it got me out of doing a lot of reading I didn't want to do. So.
Yeah. It's a good question, because if you have people who fear poor performance reviews, if they fail or if they ask a dumb question, well, then they're not going to bring those things up, and those little things become crises later when they're discovered. And so I think some of the things I do, actually I should look at Seth's website, because I create exercises that kind of remove the constraints and take people out of their day-to-day. And somehow in doing so, people feel a little more free to bring up questions and risks and constraints. And so we'll sit down in a tense situation. I'll say, okay, everyone just forget what your job is. Just come to this as if you know nothing about this project. Let's just brainstorm and problem solve and be creative and ask every question you can possibly think of about how we would solve this and what comes up. And then a few minutes later, I ask folks to put their functional hats back on. And they actually, once they've seen that it's possible, they then figure out how they can get there. But they had to have some of that pressure taken off being the expert right at first in order to see that, and then they could get there. The other practice I cultivate with my team is one of debriefing in a neutral way. All the time we talk about, how did that go? What did you learn? How did you do it? In a way that I try to take some of that fear of failure out and just focus on the opportunity to learn.
Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me? My name is Sandra from the BMW Foundation. I'm a little sick, I'm sorry. I have a question to the ownership. I have the feeling that the three of you have a great support from the companies. What about, or what would be an advice for those folks that have a little team and not so much support, and then they achieve to have achieve a goal and an importance on their projects in the companies, but now they're challenging that the ownership is completely not on them, it's on the company. So do you understand my question?
So it's how do you have success when your corporate, your institution is not fully aligned behind what you're trying to do?
And then you achieve to have success, and now the CEO is saying, look at how I'm superhero I am, and like how can you deal with the ownership at the end?
Mm-hmm. Anyone like to take it? Adrian?
You know, when I took my job, there was a few enlightened people who wanted to see change. It wasn't necessarily everyone who wanted to see change. I think it's really critical that you build a platform that's clear, that you have a long-range view that's aligned with the culture and values of the way you're working. So the first 4.5 years were fairly traumatic. You know, I can honestly say that I reconsidered what I was doing. But in the end, people see that you consistently are advocating for something that is in the best long-term interests of the company, and you have a path forward. And you've always got to be prepared to take the step yourself, because I think the world's we have too many diagnosticians in the world who can see all the problems that are around, and what you really want is someone to chip away slowly at some piece of that. So I think there's a piece of commitment that goes into it. At the end, I really don't care who gets the credit for whatever it is. You know, you get the huge personal satisfaction. And in fact, if the CEO takes the credit for something, then in fact you've done a really great job, probably.
Well, I love credit for everything, but like
you're a designer.
I am. But yesterday, a great article came out in GQ, in British GQ, where a colleague of mine is quoted as taking credit for the breadth of this work. Now, it was simply a combination of multiple press releases and some creative liberties taken by the editor. But the fact of the matter is, positive impact, restorative environmental value is being celebrated by a fashion rag, and I think that's a great thing. And if it's worth doing, it doesn't really matter who gets credit for it having been done. But if you can get your CEO on record as having claimed credit, then you just got licensed to do a lot more.
Very good.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said.
Good. Other questions? I think you've stumped everyone. Or
or it's time for cocktails.
Or it's time for drink, or great admiration. But yeah.
I'm interested in the transition of the dominant currency in business becoming more varied, so that companies are talking about all the currencies that are at play for their success, which is another way to say, I think, what we've been saying. But how do you feel it can be fostered in the dialogue among the people you work with, that the goal, the value, is on par with the financial currency that's been traditionally driving companies? So it's a cultural shift that there are multiple values at play.
Do you want to address that to anyone in particular?
I'm loving the balance of perspectives here, so I would invite someone to take it on.
Nancy mentioned that Clif Bar has 5 bottom lines. We couldn't just have 3. We have 5: planet, community, people, brands, and business. And in many cases at a corporate level, while we evaluate how we do on each of those, within products and new projects, a lot of times we would either make a decision to launch because of the financial side, the financial story, or it would be a strategic decision. And what I'm working really hard to do is to characterize the nature of that strategic decision, because without fail, it fit in one of those other 4 bottom lines. But we weren't characterizing it clearly enough for everyone on the team to understand. And so if you're not measuring something, and if you're not sharing that information in a transparent way, people aren't going to realize that that's there. And there were actually decisions being made in alignment with those values and with those bottom lines. But shame on us, we weren't telling the story. And so it's metrics, it's measuring, it's reporting, it's making things transparent that within our organization, is bringing to the basic level of what we do, making food, bringing those 5 bottom lines to life in a more real way.
The challenge, I mean, Paul, you might address this. I mean, the challenge is for companies that perhaps don't have a multiple bottom line or triple bottom line focus, that are the more traditional ones, where somehow the innovation has got to line up with the sort of traditional outputs here. How do you, and I mean, I was struck by your comment in the conversation where you talked about, as a design guy, you can say anything. You can get away with anything. Well, I'm not sure I believe that.
Well, I can get away with anything because I can also speak to the fact that year over year, the product that I presented was a 30% reduction in the manufacturer's suggested retail price as a premium proposition with a 103-point margin swing simply by doing the right thing at every point in the process. The notion that sustainability is somehow more expensive is a false notion, and I very firmly believe that waste is cost as well as pollution. And if you go in as a creative with those sorts of, armed with those sorts of facts, you can actually go in and accept the single bottom line scenario and know that by doing good, you'll exceed against that bottom line. But without question, my CEO expects top line and bottom line growth for the next 20 years without fail. I think this is probably the best way to give it to him.
Yeah. You clearly have a grasp on both languages, if you will, and being able to put things in the context of the other. Adrian, thoughts on this?
I think you just answered it. I think you have to be able to talk in the language of the business at the same time as you're proposing something slightly different. For me, it's the challenge I put out to my team is, like, what's your personal brand? I mean, what are your personal values and how is that reflected in what you're trying to achieve? And I'm lucky that Johnson & Johnson is well known for having a credo. There's 3 top parts to it, which is the people that use our products, our employees and the communities we work in. The very last, the 4th part, is about the shareholders and mistakes that we make, acknowledging that we make mistakes. So we have a very good value framework that you can hold it up against. I think it's really important to sort of be pushing that.
Yeah. So if you're now in a mentoring position, each of you, and there's a young version of you coming to you for advice on how to get started on something of similar sort of challenge and all within their institution, what would be your word of advice? Paul?
So I just finished in December the pilot class that this was taught at Rhode Island School of Design in the fall semester. And unfortunately, I did realize that I'd gone and made zealous converts out of all of these students around considerations of sustainability. And it wasn't until about 18 years into my career that I got to really flex those muscles and really sort of take ownership of this process. And what I've done is then created this opportunity for a whole class of disheartened, sad assistant designers locked into jobs that they feel guilty for doing. And so patience, I mean, really has to be patience. There will be a chance to do good in the meantime. Just don't make so very many copies. Just try not to make copies.
Wow, okay. Adrian?
Yeah, look, I'm the sort of person that lets people make mistakes, so I say go for it. But I say, you have to get beyond the strategy and have a plan for executing it and be clear that you're accountable for that, and then recruit some people to give you help. But I'm very wary about people who have fabulous ideas and want to shop it around everywhere, because then I think what you get is you get group consensus veto happening and it becomes all too difficult. I think you have to be prepared to take something through to execution.
Yeah. So we have go for it and we have patience. Diana, how are you going to square this one?
Ooh, I'm going to mix them together because I think that it's really important to design your dream house, to figure out what it is you want to go for. But then it's also important to figure out what are the steps you're going to take. Maybe you can't build the dream house right now. You have to start with phase 1, and then you build an addition, then you build an upstairs, then you build the guest house. And it's important to know what that dream house is, and it's important to start with phases that are more manageable. And I think the piece I'll add on to that is it's really important, in my experience, to focus on how you do it. Focus on those soft skills, those leadership skills, because if you're taking on something big, there are other people that need to come on the journey with you, and it's important to figure out how to bring them on that journey as a leader.
Very good. Last question.
So just along the same theme of thinking about the next generation of leaders or first movers,
My name's Chris Atkins, and I teach and direct the undergrad business program at William & Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia. And also have had the opportunity to get together with other business schools to think about how we, to use Nancy's language from the beginning, kind of re-norming for undergrads what they want out of business by what we do in the business school, and kind of changing the conversation a bit. But what I wanted to ask, and it's probably a two-parter, not just what advice you would give students, but are your companies now changing the way that they recruit and hire if they have this assumption, or at least it's starting to percolate inside the organization, that it's not just about someone who's very talented and can execute and perform, but also can commit to these other dimensions like the social or the environmental? So that's the first part. And then secondly, do you see any emerging partnerships between actually universities and the businesses so that we're actually collaborating and developing folks who can actually hit across all these different dimensions as a way of kind of linking up, right, to be able to kind of scale the change? So partly, are you changing the recruiting, and then also is there a way to partner?
Adrian, you talked about partnering with your HR department and trying to bring people in. Does this fit?
Well, we've always had we have quite an extensive recruiting organization. I guess we get a lot of people who we recruit who've been successful in a business, gone back for a deliberate reason and got a postgrad qualification, and then want to come to us as a destination. So they tend to be people who've made career choices, gone back, done some field of study, and joined us. What I've noticed, this is our experienced commercial leadership program. What I've noticed is that the backgrounds of the schools that they're coming from now more strongly express areas of public health or of more socially driven environments rather than the pure hard financial environments. What I'd like to see, and I haven't seen quite as much, is people from our business going and spending a sabbatical in an academic environment and then coming back, a year and a half later, back into the organization, because I think that we don't see a lot of two-way traffic, it's one-way traffic. But people tend to select out, not just my organization, but our company because of the values framework, so that works quite well.
One of the big problems with my industry was that because of the unlike with architecture, which is generally a project-based scenario, or graphic design, you can be brought in for a single project. The fashion cycle is continuous, and twice a year you have these very strict calendars you have to hit. So there was no opportunity for any practicing professional in fashion to go and do. It doesn't line up with the academic calendar, and so one of the things I've worked hard to do at Levi's is to craft really meaningful relationships with particular institutions so that they become the source of interns, but the interns have skills and values that have been informed by teaching that we've done by contributing these curricular features like the one I developed through the Aspen Institute project. And then also the way that the teaching is deployed, it's deployed with 2 key leads from the company, but 7 rotating spots so that other cross-functional participants get to bring their perspective in, because teaching is a fantastic management development tool for companies. It reinvigorates, it clarifies process. When you have to teach what you do, you become much clearer and cleaner with the way you do it. And connecting with the students gives a certain vitality, and you're not sucking their energy per se, but you're sort of inspired by their youth. And as such, what we get is a much higher quality of interns. And so our leadership team has signed off on this strategy that we offer full-time positions to half of the interns as they leave. So you're going back to school for your senior year, and how much more productive would any of us have been if our senior years we didn't have all the anxiety of worrying about a job, if we knew that was taken care of. So the very best get to go back and do even better work their senior year, and then come back to the company with this wonderful set of enthusiastic skills and just energy that really brings a certain levity to the company. And so I think it's a great way of companies partnering to get value for themselves and to provide value to the institutions.
And they're also great brand messengers back to the schools when they go back and can talk about the company just hired them. Mm-hmm. Diane, thoughts?
Well, Clif Bar is really small, and I'll be honest, at the moment we have more people trying to work for us than we can hire, and it's a wonderful, fortunate position to be in. We've got this great values-based business model. But what I find, I'm always telling people who are asking me, well, how do I get a job there? What do I do? I said, don't come to the company and do something that you're not passionate about every day just to be working in the company. Figure out what gets you excited every morning. What do you want to get up and do? What do you get into and then lost in when you're working? Like, is it finance? Is it crunching the numbers? Is it getting, busy with the details and creating a solution? Or is it thinking more strategically? Or is it in the kitchen? Is it working in supply chain? Figure out the function that you love, and you can bring your values and your commitment to sustainability and your interest in economic development or social welfare into the role that you're in, but create that space for yourself where you love what you actually do. More and more, I think, there's an opportunity for people to bring that interest in regardless of their function and make it a part of their job day to day. And so that's really what I've looked for, is people who love what they're doing and they're bringing those values to the table.